Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm Oscar Clark, I'm your host, he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to learn everything you want to know about game dev but never dared to ask. And today I'm going to be exploring something a little bit tangential but also deeply rooted in what games are, and that is audio drama. And I'm delighted to be joined by Chris and Emily, who are going to tell us a little bit about their world. Let's start with you, Chris. Chris, tell me who you are and what you do.
Hi, Oscar. Thank you for having me on your show. My name is Chris Gregory. I run the audio production company Alternative Stories. We make a lot of audio drama and other sorts of podcasts as well. I'm an audio drama director. I do all the sound design, and now and again, I even act.
Oh, blimey. Heaven forbid.
And yes, darling.
Darling, sweetie. And obviously one of those things, and Emily, I've been delighted to have you join my actual play podcast as well, which has been fantastic. But for the purposes of the audience here, who are your kind of classic indie game developers generally, what do you do? And, tell us a bit more about yourself.
So I'm currently acting as a creative director at Alternative Stories, where I'm very heavily involved in sort of the editorial side of things, getting our writers who come to us with ideas, helping them with their scripts and make sure that they're audio ready. But I'm also a game writer as well. So I have a background in medical writing and copywriting for marketing, game writing. I'm a novelist, audio dramatist. I basically do all of it. I do sometimes act as well. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. I'm also wondering why under my name it says AI.
And the reason it says AI, for those in the session, and basically the audience won't see this in the
I'm sorry.
Game Dev Local. No, it's fine. In the Game Dev Local podcast, they won't see it. But the AI is there because the last character you played was an AI. For those who don't know, I do an actual play podcast called Anything Could Happen, and Emily, as I said, was a player. And in the setup, we get people to put their character into the window to make sure the other players can understand who everybody is. Anyway, so enough of that. So let's talk a little bit about drama. Now, audio drama in particular has its own particular styles and so on and so forth. And for those who are interested, we had a fantastic conversation comparing game writing and audio writing and general writing on the alternative realities and
alternative stories and fake realities.
Alternative Stories and Fake Realities podcast, which I will try to make sure I put a link in the podcast too. But let's get to the basis of that. So, when we are talking about drama, we are trying to tell and communicate a story of some kind, framed in some way. And what are the kind of fundamentals there? I mean, obviously, Emily, I'll start with you, because you're thinking about it from the point of view of having written for games, as well as having written for audio drama. What would you say are the kind of key similarities and differences that you experience in looking at storytelling?
Well, I mean, I guess the key similarities are structuring a story for actors. And, that is, it's a bit of a skill if you've only been working in novel writing before and, that kind of storytelling, writing scripts for actors who are not necessarily going to be performing themselves. So in games, obviously, it's animation, they're doing voiceover. In audio drama, it's the same deal, making sure the script format is useful to them in a studio setting. Now, obviously, in games, a lot of scripts happen in all sorts of not actor-friendly sort of formats, including spreadsheets. Shudder.
Love spreadsheets.
Yeah, but I would say that if you have written for audio drama before, you have in mind what the actor needs from you in that moment, you can provide the actor with more information and with more to go on than just the words themselves. It's a great sort of grounding in, that style of writing. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of the time people talk about game writing, they think about multiple choice and branching narratives. It's not necessarily the case. You've also got cinematics that you've got to write for. You've got all sorts of writing. You've got, you know, world building and things to write for as well. And getting world building out in dialogue is also a skill. And obviously in audio drama, you can't see the visuals. Sometimes in game writing, sometimes games don't have a huge budget for massive cinematics. You do have to be able to convey world through dialogue in order to get things, you know, get messages across, get visuals across. Even if you've got just a still with a voiceover over it, you know, and you're working on a sort of indie project like that, being able to bury sort of information about the wider universe into the dialogue is very important. So yeah, there's a huge crossover in the skills necessary. Yeah.
And I think if we step away from the kind of the writing aspect of it, there's also a whole area in terms of like sound kind of setup and audio experience that it goes a bit deeper. I mean, so what in terms of audio drama, what are you doing? I mean, Chris, from your point of view, you're coming at it from a more kind of production and more sound staging kind of perspective. What does that mean, and how does that actually realize in terms of functional things that you do?
What it means, I think, is immersing your listeners into a world that they can't see. So sometimes said that audio drama is the home of sci-fi, just simply because a writer can make an audio drama, a sci-fi audio drama, on a tiny budget compared to, you know, what it would take to have a spaceship go across a screen in a film or TV show. So it's making up for the lack of visuals. It's immersing listeners, because often, and usually I would say, they'll be listening on headphones, or at least on some sort of stereo system. So my job is to give some texture to the background sounds, to make sounds pop across from left to right and make you really feel like you're there in that space with those actors, with those characters. And yeah, so I think that's the main thing about the you know what we're trying to do. And I would say that the dramas that we tend to make, we've kind of fallen into this world of making science fiction, and we've done a bit of climate fiction, we've done other sorts of speculative fiction. So I think there is this kind of overlap really with the world of games, actually. You know, a lot of
I'd go a little bit further. I think that, you know, whilst you are dealing with a situation where the audio periphery, for want of a better phrase, is telling part of the story in an audio drama, because we have the absence of visual sort of triggers, I think it doesn't mean that it's not just as important when we do have those visual triggers. In fact, if anything, I'd argue the importance. I mean, this is where I know I just don't have this skill set. You know, I don't recognise the impact except its absence. So things like knowing that when you lift something up and put it down, it makes a sound. Things like knowing that the spatial kind of effect of knowing that that sound is coming from over there. Even down to a game like Quake, where back in the early days, we did my first ever actual professional engagement at Quakeadelica, where I joined as essentially the boss of the team running it. I had no credit for it. James Kay did all the work. He did an amazing job. But we had a guy called Thresh. Thresh is the guy that beat John Carmack and won his Ferrari. How did he do it? He did it because he was listening. He was able to devastate and destroy the UK champion who'd just been crowned that day, something like 52 to -1. I am talking about incredible devastation in terms of skill, purely because he knew the sound of when someone picked up a med pack or a piece of ammo, and he knew the map so profoundly. He knew exactly where that was coming from, and therefore he knew where you would be. He knew where he had to be in order to pop you, and that's it. You were gone.
Yeah, so that's incredible, isn't it?
Oh, it is honestly, and the guy's lovely and he's still around in the industry. But I mean, to my point, to your point rather, to me, this is why I think this sort of audio thing. I mean, are there sort of any sort of thoughts or tricks about that development of audio in a space that think what's the low hanging fruit that a game developer, an indie game developer in particular, who doesn't know this stuff, what should they be looking out for?
Well, my trick, it's not really a trick. I know a lot of other people do this, but for any given space in which a scene in a drama, and I guess the same would be true of a game, is taking place, I tend to sketch out that space. And so in front of me, I will have a 3D representation of the doors here. Character A is standing here, character B is standing there, character A slightly to the left, character B slightly to the right. If they leave the room, they go through a door that is hard right. There is a desk in the middle of the room, and sometimes they walk around it and put things on it, and that makes a sound. So that idea of a 3D representation, and interestingly, this tool, which some listeners may have heard of, called Dolby Atmos, does that in terms of, you can actually chart a little dot on a grid, and the sound of that character represented by the dot will follow where you put that dot. And that's exactly what I do, but I do it in a lower tech sort of way,
a manual way. Yeah,
but I mean, making that space consistent, I think, is important for the believability of the space that they're in.
Yeah, it's immersion. I mean, I would give it a more wanky title, probably,
Go wanky,
and I would call it like world composition.
That is wanky,
audio.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It is really wanky, yeah. But if you're talking about like what you're doing, I mean, you are talking about sound, which is very sort of musical almost. You're talking about the beats, you're talking about the footsteps, you're talking about the breaths, you're talking about, the wind in the trees, whether there are birds, whether there's music in the background, all of these things that compose in layers upon layers. And you're very modest, so you probably wouldn't give it this sort of like poetic emphasis. But having worked with you for a long time, I get to listen to just the vocals, the vocal mix. And then I get to listen to the fully mixed, produced audio version. I have to say the elevation that happens when that process has taken place is insane. And it is a incredibly creative and all-encompassing art, to be able to build that world. Because the words are one thing, the story is one thing, but how do you know you're in a room? How do you know you're in a park? How do you know you're like, all of that comes from, the composition and what you create. You'd probably never say this about yourself. I don't think you've ever waxed lyrical about your own side of things.
I'd be a gold companion if I did, wouldn't I? I mean, of course, I would say the same about the scripts, Emily. But there we go.
Oh, shucks! But I mean, to nail this, I mean, so what I'm trying to, the angle I'm going on with this is, I feel that the stuff that you're doing in an audio drama, because of the constraints, requires you to enhance that cell of the world construction, for want of a better phrase. And you've got to sell it to such an extent that doesn't need to have the visuals. But I think that it makes it just as important when we have those pieces, if we really genuinely want to create a sense of true immersion inside the world, that we actually leverage those same exact techniques. So to my mind, the more game developers think about and engage with audio drama, the more they will be able to understand how to apply those techniques back in the game experiences they're trying to make themselves. Does that make sense?
I did a narrative design course a little while ago, and part of the course materials, it was about development of sort of a world, environment profile, basically. And one of the bonus marks in the assignment was audio cues. So what the area would sound like. And I thought, the fact that it's just a bonus, like this is if you're a writer, if you're a narrative designer, if you're creating this world with these characters, that you wouldn't necessarily think about those things. And for me, it's so absolutely natural to be thinking, when you're in this space, there is a strange pressure to the sound, to the environment. You know, like it's silent, but it's not quite silent. All sounds are muffled. Things like that, like just feed into the tone of what you're creating. And yeah, that was part of the course, but just bonus points if you can think of these things. And I think actually it needs to be pretty central to your thought process from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you could even imagine, even in sort of classical, flat fiction, if you don't provide some clues, some pointers to what is going on in the audio space for that character, are you truly creating an immersive experience? Now, yeah, I suppose we can rely on the player to fill in the gaps, but if we provide them with no clues, are we really doing it justice?
We'd be denying one of our senses, wouldn't we? And we would never do that in a film or TV and say, right, I'm not going to have any visuals at this point, or very rarely. But in audio, it's all we've got. The sound is all we've got. And just to add to what Emily's just been saying, I think a technique that writers can use, and I think this would work in game writing as well, is rather than say, we hear, Jeff walks off to the left or whatever, describe what you actually hear. And so I would want to know, as a sound designer, what's the surface that Jeff's walking on? What shoes is he wearing? Maybe even what clothes he's wearing, because there is rustling of clothing. But if Jeff is so inclined and is wearing stilettos, that's going to sound very different to if he's wearing military boots or whatever. Yeah. And the writer sure as hell has an idea of what Jeff's going to be wearing, and they should therefore tell the sound designer how to do that sound. So if you think how a character is dressed, the environment they're operating in, then share it. And I think that applies equally in game writing to audio drama.
And you can even argue you can be playful with that as well. So you've got Jeff, the Space Marine, in the big outfit, but what you hear are stilettos heading, oh, what on earth is going on?
Well, this is the thing. I think like one of the things that I've learned is that if you're a writer and you get too precious about it, okay, and you can be thinking, okay, Jeff is in a taffeta ball gown and, there's a rustle of silk. But if you haven't said that specifically, you're not going to get it back like that. You're going to get, Jeff in a marine suit, and as a result, as a writer, there has to be a certain amount of, if I have failed to communicate this thing, does it matter to the overall production? If I have failed and then the sound designer has done something different, do I then have to let go of that? Or do I bite it and bite the sort of the repercussions and say that was my bad? But it's very important that we have this.
Yeah.
Does it then come down to budget? Because then you've got to spend time undoing it, redoing it. So as a writer, if you don't provide these details, and they are important, you have to be prepared for the fact that they might not come out the way you want, and you might just have to cope with that and not get upset about it. That's worth bearing in mind as well, because writers can be precious.
Yeah, no, and you got me thinking when you talk about budget is, part of that budget is going to be time spent. Part of it is going to be whether I'm going to be using, professionally sourced assets, or if I'm making things myself. I mean, Foley type sounds are available everywhere, and they are very relatively cheap and royalty free to a certain extent, depending on the source. But there's still a cost. Even if that cost is putting that time together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think one of the costs I think that a lot of sound designers underestimate is the cost of going through the sound libraries to find the thing you want. So I had an example of this the other day where a character was drinking wine. And so I was needing the sound of a wine glass just being put down on a mahogany cabinet. It needn't have been mahogany, actually, but you get the drift. So
some hardwood.
Some hardwood,
yes.
Probably sourced from the Amazon, I don't know. Yeah. So they were...
ethically sourced, of course.
Ethically sourced. I went through the sound libraries, and the first 4 or 5 pages were all glasses being smashed, because they're the interesting sounds. Yeah. And so there is a lot of work to be done in just finding what you need. But as you say, Oscar, there are great sound libraries out there. I mean, if you're starting off, there's a wonderful one called freesound.org, which is, as the name suggests, free, and there are all sorts of sounds there. So check that one out if this is something you're interested in starting working on.
I mean, it's definitely my favourite price.
Indeed, yes, very favourable. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, the point though is, again, I mean, I'm gonna dangerously tread into the AI question, because I think one of the things that we often assume with the current upsurge of the use of AI tools is that can replace the need to think about these things. But what I'm finding is, as smart and clever and useful as AI can be, the risks and the problems of using it are manyfold, not least that they tend to revert to the mean, which means that you don't, no matter how many times you ask the same question, you don't get to find the actual thing that you're looking for. And also you're reliant on the fact that these things have been sourced through acquisition from other people's assets. Does that make sense to you? I mean, do you only I know, Emily, you've got very particular views on AI, but go for it.
That's because Emily is an AI.
Yes, I have particular views. Obviously, anything at the moment that has come from an AI has been stolen, pretty much. When you're looking at sound libraries, when you're looking at visual sort of libraries, artists are getting announcements from these platforms saying, by the way, now everything that you've made is being made available, like is being used to train our AI, and not, that's not something that you get to negotiate. That's just happening. And as a result, it is incredibly problematic. What I would say is that what I foresee happening is there's going to be a transition period with AI, where everyone thinks it frees people up and gives people quality without the effort. And it's going to take a few years before people realize that actually it's not better quality and it's not worth the effort. And it's better to go with what people have made. But it's going to take a while to get there. And it's like AI art, to an untrained eye, a beautiful image. But when you actually look at it, it's kind of awful. And like when you actually look closely at it, it's actually it's soulless.
What do you mean there are not
plastic.
7 fingers on your hand?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's just weird and uncanny and not right. And it's just strange. And it's going to take a few years for people to realize that actually this isn't an answer. It's not a substitute. It's not this. So why not get ahead of this? We are in a position where we're in that transitionary period. You are going to be making a product that hopefully you won't have to remake in 2 or 3 years. You're also relying on the idea that these sounds that you get through an AI source are going to be available if that AI source disappears or goes under or any of those things. It's not necessarily reliable, the longevity of it. So just get ahead. Think of the long term. Think of your audience. Think of the fact that a lot of people do have strong feelings about AI. A lot of artists do. So if you're using AI in what you're making, it could mean that artists later won't work with you because you have made that choice. You are potentially cutting yourself off from a huge amount of valuable human talent by making the decision to use AI in your production. And especially now, I think that it's just a bad idea. Like if I started using AI for something, I would tank a lot of my audience. I would lose like a good chunk of my audience because there is such strong feelings about it. Is it worth it? No.
I mean, I'll give you an example. So, I mean, I personally have some interest in AI. I'm very much a technology kind of early adopter type personality. And I've tried to use AI to help me pre-write my book on game economy design. And I've had to throw away 99% of it. But that was okay, because that was always the intent anyway. and it actually solved a massive issue for me, which is getting me started.
Yeah.
And so I think there are, like I say, with all these things, there are pros and cons. I think there are some massive cons. I think, Emily, you described them very eloquently. For me personally, I find that it's a very useful tool to get me to the point where I can start the work faster, which is probably as far as I think it's a sensible level of engagement. And I again, I think we've had this conversation before. I do admit to one particular moment of use for AI, particularly AI art, where I use it when I need an on-the-fly D&D map, which there's no way I'm going to get that map in that time frame, in the few seconds I have to explain the world to a player. So again, I feel bad about that, because let's face it though, although I would never have paid for that, because I'm not generally going to be buying it, I do spend money on these things. This is not something which is a normal world experience, but it is still very dependent on all of the hard effort, all of the talent of all the people whose artwork has been taken.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an incredibly emotionally challenging thing. But at the end of the day, like you say, there's some severe drawbacks. Let's go back to the audio side. So just because I think it's useful, I want to get that out because I think it's useful, because I know you have such useful opinions on the subject, and I think it's eloquently put. So let me go back to one of the things you described is about the framing the function for the actor on what they're trying to do. I find that really fascinating. What are the things that you do to help the actor prior to making that recording? About, obviously you've got the script, but is there more to it than that?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes.
Go on, Emily.
Absolutely. When you
think process.
Well, you think about the amount of depth that we have in our thought processes before we utter a word.
Yeah.
Like there is a lot going on in our heads that is not communicated in the words that come out of our mouths. And what the actors need or thirst for is information about the character. And we're talking about context. And the process of acting is wonderful to me. I do it a bit myself, but I am very aware of the professionals that we work with, because they are able to imbibe information that is seemingly irrelevant, and that comes out in the tone of what they produce. That helps them to get that bullseye of delivery that you're looking for. And what you're looking for in giving them context is things like what their history is, where they're going, so what their motives in a scene, so like what they're hoping to get out of this particular interaction. And you're talking about their relationships to other characters and their history with other characters. Because if they're having a conversation with another character, there is a lot that's going on in the background of that. Is there a chip on their shoulder because all the way, for the last 2 years, this person has, exceeded, as sort of, excelled where they themselves have not? Is there a history where they raised together and as children, your character was picking on this other character the whole time? So there's like a subconscious sort of superiority going on in the delivery, because there's just this confidence that this person is going to bow to your suggestion as opposed to reacting aggressively or with force. All of these things subtly inform the performance. And so what I tend to do when I'm writing new characters, I will make a little video and I will introduce the character and their place in the world and what they do. And so recently we've cast a brand new character in one of our productions. And I made this video, and it was about him, his past deeds, his past misdeeds, his fears in this particular moment related to his past misdeeds, which made his fear genuine. It wasn't just sort of like, I'm going to pretend to be scared here, because it's probably the done thing to appear scared. No, this is genuine. It's rooted in real concerns. His current thing, what his ambitions are for the future. This person is, technically approaching retirement, but still ambitious, still wants to make his mark on the world, still has that drive that got him to the level of colonel in the military before he left the military and went into munitions. Things like that all inform and help the actor to, well, it gives them a foundation to stand on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise what you're doing is you're saying, here's the words, speak them. And that is a person in zero gravity in the middle of a room. Like, where do I even start? What is my reference point for this? I don't even know. And what you're doing when you give them all this context is giving them a world to stand in, giving them a floor, giving them a environment. You are giving them that anchor point. And it is so important. And so, yeah, actors, any of that information that they can get hold of, they just draw it in like a sponge, and then they just let it out in the lines. The lines themselves are surface level,
But it's also really good for a writer to know all that stuff as well. If that character then becomes a bigger part of the story on an ongoing basis, you've done all the spade work, as it were, to sketch that character in a much more rounded way. So not only does the actor know about it, but the writer does as well. And one of the rules that I know Emily sometimes uses is the always, sometimes, never rule for character development. They always behave in this way. They sometimes behave in that way. They never do that. And you can think about that in various aspects of that character's behaviour. But it's good to share that with an actor as well. And it just gives a much more rounded perspective of the character they're playing.
But also imagine that these aren't just static things. These are characteristics of the defining feature of the character. But as their character evolves, because if at the end of the day, story is, if nothing, if it's not about a journey, how do you communicate that transitional process when you're using such kind of defined moments like always, sometimes, never?
The best way I can say that is that's where you get this is where the person's going.
Yeah.
This is what happens next. This is what's going on in their future. Whether they know that or not at that point is irrelevant. It's because if you know where they're going and it's different, as like they would need to be a different person to be there to where they are now. The actor knows that they are at a point of change.
Yeah.
And that these moments, and also if you're writing a scene where you're like, this is pivotal because it's a next step on the point to becoming that.
Yeah.
The actor will put emphasis on different parts of the scene because suddenly a line that sounds throwaway is going to actually be the seed that changes things. And that's one of the things, I mean, in the stuff that we make, I hear fans being like, "Oh, I listened to every episode 3 times because I hear things and I'm like, that's going to be important later." And 99% of the time they're right because I know where everything's going and I've baked it all in, and it's all little Easter eggs all the way through. And I think that's what you meant, right? Is that what
it
you
is?
meant?
Yeah. Because we're talking here about the foreshadowing, essentially. Because if the actor doesn't understand that this character is capable of that change at some point in that stage, then how will we, as a recipient of that information, reconcile the change?
Yeah, exactly. It has to be plausible.
To me, that's the fundamental. And now, again, let's take this into games. So, obviously, all of the same principles apply to games, but one of the issues we have with games is quite often we get the narration, or the writers at least, involved too late. We often have built mechanics, we have built structures. Oh, let's write a story now. I mean, I think it is less common, but it is still the case far too often. I know you've experienced this. What should somebody in that situation where they know they've got to make the narrative work? How can they address those issues?
Oh, God.
Or are there any ways they can address those issues?
They're always going to be less good than, than writing it from scratch. I always think of the League of Legends example on this, because League of Legends for a long time was just well, it is the game, and all of the characters were just half a side of A4 character profiles and nothing else. And who was it who got involved in that company? It was back in like 2011. They hired the guy who did World of Warcraft world development, I think, or something.
Not sure, yeah.
Can't remember. I looked this up at one point. I was very knowledgeable about it back then. I think COVID happened since. So, this guy came in, took all of those half-page character profiles, and then built the actual world.
Yeah.
And it's things like, talking to other writers, I think Rhianna Pratchett on Mirror's Edge, and she went into this, and the game designers, she sort of told me that the game designers were like, look, you can run and you can jump and you can do all of these things. She's like, yeah, why? And they were like, you can run and you can jump. And she was like, yeah, but why? Why are we running and jumping? What's the actual reason for this? Why does this world exist? Why is it the way it is? None of that had been given thought, because it was all about, functionality, level design, getting from A to B. No reason behind it. And of course, the player is going to be like, well, why should I bother? I mean, there are some players out there that will just play a game for the functionality and for the, the sort of the victory. But a game is way better if they know why they're playing it. They can invest in the story, they can invest in the character, they can invest in that journey. And so I guess that's the thing. If you get into one of these things, why? Why are we here? And asking the team that. And because the team, weirdly, will have answers to some really strange, unexpected moments, but then they won't have answers to some really big stuff that is really fundamental. So sort of knowing where the team is at and the little bits they have decided is also very important. And then you're sort of like, okay, now I know where I'm at. Now I know where they're at. How much do we have to retrospectively build?
How much can we actually say? What can we actually make? How do we make this make sense? But I mean, another aspect, more technical on this side, though, is obviously with a game, we'll often be reusing elements of the script, and in different contexts, and in particular with different needs of emotional delivery.
Yes.
And again, that to me sounds like an incredible challenge for the sound environment. I mean, we've all heard it where the squeaky wheel gets the grease is the classic line from Baldur's Gate back in the day, and it was always repeated endlessly and completely out of context, and the tonality with the next following statement was completely off. And that happens. How do we do it? And obviously within this, there's a lot of like barks, I think is the phrase that's used to describe the other words, market stall calling and all that kind of stuff. How do you approach those kind of issues? I think, Chris, you don't do this in games, but you must have moments like that where you're having to decide which version of a delivery to use when, and sometimes I imagine there'll be times where you go, oh, hang on a minute, he said that before, let me grab that one.
So try and answer this as briefly as possible, because I could go into a very long explanation here and everyone would switch off, so I won't do that. Back in the pandemic, when no one could meet in actual spaces together, we had all our actors do their lines in isolation, and I believe that's the way a lot of games dialogue is still recorded, actually, and a lot of audio drama, to be fair. In that context, what I was doing was building a complex jigsaw where there were 4 or 5 versions of every piece. And what I was trying to do was choose the line that best responded and felt most natural responding to the line before. And then the one after that would be the best response to the one I just added in. So you're building up this layer upon layer of the most natural responses to the previous line. Now, the way we mostly work now, given that we can gather with other humans again, is that we'll go into a studio and we'll try and do every scene live in a single in a single take. We'll do various versions of takes, but we will try and choose, take 3 was the best, so we're going to use that in its entirety. So we're not building that thing up anymore. But so I think it's really about choosing what sounds the most natural, the performance that hits the beats that you want to hit. So if we know, as Emily described previously, there is a pivotal line in this, we don't want a low-key delivery of that line unless we want it to go under the radar for a particular reason. We want to make sure that line's really good. So we'll choose the version where that line is really good and the lines around it lead up to it nicely. So I think there's lots of ways that we could do that, but usually we're working from the end point backwards, I guess.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like I say, it just means that the level of complexity and the time constraint in order to be able to hear, compare, to match, to decide the natural thing is huge. Yeah, it's a huge level of cost. Back to the comment I mean much earlier about kind of the the implications of these decisions can be profound in terms of cost.
Yes.
But when it comes to writing those things, and you talked about guidelines for the actor, does this reuse of lines, particularly in a game context, have an effect on the way you write those things, Emily?
You have to be very careful, I think, in terms of indicating whether something's for general use or whether something is for specifically. This also comes down to the coding because, if you are communicating to the actor that a line is, sort of neutrally given or emotionally given or, whatever, you also then have to communicate that to the developers and the software developers who are then going to write the commands to say this line only if, then you've got the if then statements that come in, like if they have just responded this, then they will respond like that. So it's all a case, it's when you're communicating stuff like that, you are communicating to the actor, but then also the people who are coding it. And that's where it becomes really, really complicated because there is a distance between writing and recording with the actor and getting that emotional beat, and then also that emotional beat coming through in level 6 when a lot has gone under the bridge and you maybe wrote this reaction thinking of levels 1 and 2 instead, and this thing's come back. So it's about communicating with all departments, and there's always going to be bugs in the system where that's concerned, and it's always going to be kind of funny. There's a lot of these in games that people just kind of laugh at because there is a sort of expectation to have those repeating barks that come back. I mean, it's like, in Skyrim, I used to be an adventurer like you, but then I took an arrow to the knee.
Arrow to the knee, yeah.
Yeah, every guard in every town, there is a guard who says exactly the same thing. And,
I have the T-shirt.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They become classics. And, in Baldur's Gate 3, I can't tell you how many times my character said, these boots have seen everything. And this could be immediately after the most epic battle you've ever fought.
Yeah, exactly. I need to go back and replay Baldur's Gate 3, I have to say. I just restarted it, but then I realised if I carried on, I would be not writing the book I'm supposed to be writing. I want to go into one more thing on this. So you've talked about kind of how you frame and structure and provide information to the actor. We've talked about how we create a sound environment to sell the specific experience, about the sense of presence and immersion. One thing that you guys talked to me about was that you're starting to do elements to prepare people prior to them taking on a character by giving them sort of like a care package or kind of a structural framing, almost like a mini audio book to get them into that state. I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit about what that implies and how you do that?
Shall I start on this?
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
This is very much an Emily thing, and again, this was had its birth in the pandemic, as a lot of things did. when we couldn't get actors together in a space, it became very difficult to direct actors. So to prepare the set of character notes that Emily described earlier was really important, I think. So she would make a video, it would be addressed to the actor, congratulating them on getting the role and then telling them a bit about the character. And it was the life story of that character and how that character will behave in future scenes. So that prepared the actor. What we now have with the show we make called the Dex Legacy is 2 seasons worth of actual story that we can direct people to and say, well, just listen to that. It'll only take you 8 hours. So you just listen to that and that'll tell you everything.
It's only got 500 million, or 500,000, whatever, people watching it.
Quite a lot, more than 12.
More than 12.
More than 12. Yeah.
So that would be one thing. I mean, one thing that I think we've both kind of envisaged is, the way that cutscenes work in a video game. We had this idea about making kind of little audio cutscenes that perhaps you could use for tabletop role-playing games, brief characters before they gather to play by, go away and listen to this little drama. And I think it would be a very cheap but also very immersive way of getting people into the mindset of the game they're about to play, without it just being 5 sides of A4 that you've got to read. Because there's nothing that turns someone off, an actor or a player, I think, than being faced with a pamphlet that they've got.
I'm a writer, and I am the worst. I don't read the stuff. No. I don't read the pop-ups. I write the pop-ups. I skim. Yeah, no, I am literally the worst. When I'm writing, I bear this in mind because most writers, I think, do read the stuff. Whereas I am a classic one for being like, no, I want to get to the game. I'll skip,
sure
and then get to the game and then be like, what am I doing?
What was that?
So, yeah, exactly. So as a result, as a writer, I have that kind of player in mind the whole time. And it's like, okay, how else can we do this? Can we make all of that feeling one line? Can we condense this somehow? Can we convey it in a more interesting way? And actually, when you were talking there, Chris, I was thinking Pandemic Legacy, the board game. Because the Legacy board game, one of the best games I've ever played in my life, Pandemic Legacy. We're still working through chapter 2, but chapter 1, the only way that could have been made better was if the sections of story that you unlocked as you played were listenable, assets. That would have been really cool. As it was still cool. You took the stickers out, you took the bits of additional story out, it changed things, it pivoted things. If that had been a QR code for a bit of audio that you could then play out through your phone to everybody around the table or something, that would have been so cool. And being able to, then immerse people, not require them to read a page and a half of added story, stuff like that. It was a very beautifully designed game. I don't think there were ever any moments where it got dull like that, but it could have made it just a tiny bit better.
But if you haven't played the Pandemic games, you've still got to learn how the mechanics work, what the cubes do and what cards do. These are still functional things you have to do. And I know a lot of people revert to watching the YouTube clip, but I think there's something about audio that frees you from the physicality in a way that video doesn't.
Think about the fact that a lot of people, if they've got like gaming teams that they get together on the weekend or something, or like once a month, everybody gathers at a house. On the way in the car, you could put on this audio thing that then refreshes your memory on how to do all of the things. We are actors on the way to the studio when we were recording season 2, and it had been a while since we'd recorded season 1. They were watching my briefing videos on the way to the studio on their mobile phones, just to recap and get back in the headspace. It's amazing what audio can do for that. And it's convenient. You can listen to it while you're cooking. You can listen to it in the car. You can listen to it while you're on your way to the train station.
Walking the dog.
You can listen to it on the go. Yeah. Exactly. And then when you get to said destination, to then start playing with your friends, you are in the zone. You are there. You don't have to spend ages recapping, like, how the hell do we even play this again? you know.
And the QR code is a great portal into that, actually, because we've all got a phone that we can scan, and it will also then play the thing. So,
isn't it amazing how back in the sort of early 2000s, the whole idea of a QR code was like, no one's ever going to do it. I never understood why everyone was so against it. And then the pandemic comes along. It's now the thing that we do.
Yeah.
We're so used to it. It's amazing. But I want to go back a little bit because I think that there's something about this that I think is very fascinating. I think I'm like Emily. If I am going to play a game, and my two of my most hated games are Watch Dogs 2 and Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy 14, where you had to click X for about 25 to 30 minutes.
Yep.
With no actual input other than progress. Yep. And it drove me mad. I just gave up on the games.
Just save yourself the RSI of doing that, honestly, and you just...
honestly, no, don't do that. I had a similar situation relatively recently with the Infinity Nikki, where Craig and I from Pocket Gamer did a review of the game. But the point is that had I been able to go in and play the game and not have to wait for the text to appear on the screen before I could press X, I would have happily listened to that in the background whilst I was getting ready and getting into playing.
Yeah.
And if you could separate out the experience of the narration, of the exposition from the doing, I think that as a player, I'd be massively, massive. And to your point, I think as a voice actor, getting that information prior to going into it again would make it so much quicker to immerse myself into that principle.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that audiences have changed. And it used to be that only kids were playing games, except now those kids are growing up and they've got kids and they've got lives. The latest Monkey Island game took this into account beautifully with very intelligent recaps, so previously ons to what you did before in the game, because they knew that their players weren't going to be playing this solidly for several days, and they would need to be told what happened last time because a week or two has passed, and so maybe accommodating the busy lives of this generation of players is actually something that game studios really need to be thinking about. And
I totally agree. I refer to it as the lapse time user experience. We talk about the first time user experience a lot. I don't think we talk about the lapse time user experience enough. And Zelda, for me, is a classic case where I love the game, but I just don't have the time. And I had a 3-month gap, tried to go back, and I had to restart because I couldn't remember how to play. And I've tried twice doing that. And as a result, I'm never going to finish that game, even though I know it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So anyway, on that note, thank you so much for that, taking the time out. I'm going to just pose one last question to you guys, which is, given all the things that we've been talking about in terms of writing and audio and prepping actors and creating soundscapes, what's that one thing you would like the audience to take away from as an indie game developer? What should they be thinking about to learn from the stories that we've been talking through? Chris, do you want to start?
Well, I'm going to start with just the word overlap, really. So I think we talked about a Venn diagram over a pint sometime not that long ago. And this Venn diagram, I think, has the world of indie audio drama and people who play games. And I think it is almost 100% overlap. So just one circle rather than
the ultimate Venn diagram.
The ultimate, or
boss level.
A failed Venn diagram, possibly, you might say. So I think there's a huge overlap between the worlds. I don't think it's necessarily the same the other way. Actually, I don't think all game players listen to audio drama. In fact, I know that it's only a tiny percentage.
Yet.
But so I think that would be a point. And the other bit of the overlap is the actors. So we have a lovely guy called Ethan Reed, who is one of the dream visitors in Baldur's Gate. He is also the star of our upcoming, possibly next week, audio drama
That's next week at the time of
actually,
recording, rather than
Yes.
So, he will be. He's in one of our dramas. Tiffany Clare is in
He's in
several
two.
of our. He's in 2 of our dramas. Yes.
Yeah.
Tiffany Clare, who was one of the voices in The Forgotten City, is in, and various other games, is in our dramas as well. So there is overlap between these worlds.
Well, let's not forget my good friend, our good friend Kareem Comfrey, who's been in numerous of your dramas and others, and also I think he's the go-to very deep English voice that also happens to end up offering anyone who ever wants an Egyptian in a game. It's probably Kareem. So
probably,
he's just got the most amazing voice.
He has.
Yes.
He has. Yeah.
So we've just cast him as a mech pilot in a drama that will be coming out very soon. So yes, if you're into heavy metal and walking machines, then listen out for Wasteland.
Yeah.
He said, plugging his upcoming drama.
Has to be done. The overlap, totally buy into that. Emily, what about for yourself? What's that one thing you'd like people to take away from this?
Story, please. Know why you're doing things. When you've got a character, why are they running through your world? What is the world about? Just why? Ask yourself why. Whenever I'm talking about world building with people, I call it the why Warren. It's very easy. As soon as you start asking yourself why, the world just builds, because you come up with reasons, and the reasons lead to world. Just start asking yourself why. Why is this person here? Why is there a barrel? What does a barrel do? What does it signify? Why is there an ocean? Why are you on a beach? Why? Where are they? All of these things. Just why? Why is this happening? And you have the reasons. I think people find this intimidating. You shouldn't. You have the reasons there. You do. Whether you've thought about them specifically or not, you do know pretty much. Or if you don't yet, they are just an arm's reach away. Yeah. You just have to reach out and get them. And the word that prompts that exercise is why. Yeah. Start with that. And also, maybe if you can't, and they're more than an arm's reach away, get in touch with a writer.
I actually have a slightly kind of sort of variant version of that, and that is so what. I think so what is incredibly powerful because you have to ask why implicitly to get to the point where you can ask so what, because at the end of the day, so what allows us to make sure it's grounded in something. It's meaningful and it's purposeful. But
why should we care about this, and why should we care about it now?
Yes, exactly. And so what actually came from marketing for me, because I was a trained marketeer. I think you did some of that yourself, Emily. And one of the early lessons was so what. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For me, it was start with why.
Start with why. Yeah. I mean. Or the 5 whys. There are lots of methods of using why in things, and we should do more of it. Very easy to ignore. I know I ignore it more often than I should. So on that note, exactly. Thank you very much, folks. If people wanted to get hold of you or find out more about what you're doing, Chris, what's the best way for them to do that?
Search out our shows, The Dex Legacy, you will find on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Find out more about the company, alternativestories.com.
Thank you very much. And Emily, yourself?
You can find me on most social media platforms at Emily Inkpen. I'm incredibly easy to find. If you just Google me, I'm all over that. My website, emilyinkpen.com, will also lead you to thedexlegacy.com. It's sort of centered on the same sort of hub. So yeah, Emily Inkpen, just search for that and you're good.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much for having us. If you enjoyed that, please like, subscribe, share, tell other people about it. And if you want to get involved, don't forget that there's a Discord group and we can talk about that. We're all about creating a community of people who love making games. And if you want to be part of that, then just go check us out. Check out the other podcasts and check out the Discord. So thank you very much for listening. And again, we'll be back next time on Game Dev Local.